any accused person becomes subject to interrogation or arrest. And since all testimony is given in secret, the inquisitor encourages all good citizens to denounce any neighbors they might suspect to be heretics.
The purpose of the general inquisitions and the edicts of grace and edicts of faith were to get as many people out into the office of the inquisitors as possible. And so they did use fear, they used terror, they used self-interest.
The inquisitor must have incriminating testimony from at least 2 witnesses before he can move forward. Sometimes the targets of investigations have no idea they are in trouble until the day they are summoned.
Much of the evidence in inquisitorial procedure takes place before you know that there's an investigation going on. When you're brought in, that investigation is just about completed. I mean, it's quite opposite from a modern criminal trial.
Realizing the danger of false or malicious accusations, the inquisitors do make an attempt to weed out lies from truth. When the accused is first brought forward, he or she is asked to list all enemies. If those names match any on the witness list, the inquisitor is supposed to disregard that testimony. But the legal protections end there. The accused never learns the actual names of his accusers or even the specifics of the accusation.
It was very difficult to prove your innocence once the inquisitors have gotten hold of you.
Even suspects who confess to heresy can't be reconciled with the Church until they give names and information about other suspected heretics. If the accused balks, he risks a prison sentence and seizure of all his property.
If you're being uncooperative, the inquisitors may reduce your food ration, they may chain you to the walls. So the primary mechanism for getting people to confess is simply to lock them away for protracted periods of time to have them think things over.
Book Directorium Inquisitorium was written in 1376 by Inquisitor Nicholas Aymeric of Aragon. It describes the commitment and tenacity required of a 14th or 15th century inquisitor, and even includes a handy list of clever tricks used to fool suspects into confessing.
And one that I found very chilling was that when you sit there holding a little piece of parchment in your lap, looking down at it, and checking it as the person gives you his testimony. And eventually you can say, well, no, what you're telling me can't be true. I can see plainly that you're not telling me the truth. And what the suspect under interrogation thinks is you've got a copy of somebody else's deposition when you simply got a blank piece of parchment.
There was a powerful incentive on the part of sincere inquisitors to get to the truth any way that they could. And if they were to ride roughshod over some rights of other defendants, well, that was just something that had to be done in order to get to the truth.
There is another chilling aspect to the inquisitor's job: torture. In the Middle Ages, it is considered an acceptable form of lie detection. Inquisitors select the method of torture, but they leave the actual hands-on performance to professional torturers, experts at inflicting pain.
First of all, the torture had to be described to the person. Then the instruments of torture had to be shown to the person. And after about 3 or 4 of these steps, do you actually get one form or another of torture actually applied. So that at any moment, the defendant could say, I've had enough of this.
The strapado is the late Middle Ages and Renaissance era's most popular instrument of torture. The accused's hands are bound behind his back and attached to a rope hanging over a beam in the ceiling. Sometimes weights are added to the victim's feet. Once hoisted into the air, the prisoner is lowered, then quickly raised again or jerked violently. Leg screws and shin vices are more mechanically sophisticated devices for causing pain. With every turn of the screw, more and more excruciating pressure is applied to the prisoner's legs. In the midst of such mayhem, the inquisitor's notary carefully and faithfully records the events of the session, ready to take down a confession if or when it is uttered. The clergy rationalize all this as an act of benevolence. After all, If torture leads to a confession, then the offender can finally reconcile with God and receive salvation. With all these methods at their disposal, it is not surprising that the conviction rate of medieval inquisitors is almost 90%. Could heresy have really been that widespread? Or were the inquisitors using their power to frighten people into false confessions?
One of the great problems with dealing with the inquisitorial records, I think, is determining whether you can believe anything that's in them at all. Because the inquisitors, if they wanted to, could get people to confess to almost anything.
All through the 13th and 14th century, papal inquisitors wend their way through parts of southern Europe, collecting accusations and investigating heretics. These priests see themselves as God's frontline soldiers in the war to save souls, but they leave behind a battlefield littered with casualties. Inquisition frightens citizens into turning on their friends and neighbors, tearing families apart, and turning peaceful communities into rumor mills of lies and suspicions. Throughout all the Holy Roman Empire and kingdoms and principalities of Europe, townspeople wait in dread for the Sermo Generalis, the judgment phase of the Inquisition process. Punishments, or penances, vary from public scourging to imprisonment or forced labor. In many cases, convicted heretics are ordered to wear distinctive clothing that announces their shame to the public.
Typically what they wore on their clothing was a yellow cross, one on the front of their clothing and one on their back. And this was to be worn at all times when they were out of doors. It was not to be obscured by other clothing, and if it wore out, it was supposed to be replaced.
Those branded with the yellow cross become pariahs in the community. But their fate is mild in comparison to the penances suffered by relapsed heretics. Those who recant then go back to their old ways. Their punishment is execution. Canon law forbids members of the clergy to participate in any judgment of blood, so inquisitors get around this rule by handing condemned heretics over to the secular authorities.
The inquisitors shed some crocodile tears and say some words that they hope that the secular authorities will display clemency towards these people. But the thorough expectation is that they're going to be burned.
When those adjudged guilty of heresy have been given up to the civil power by the Inquisition, the chief magistrate of the city shall take them at once and shall within 5 days at the most execute the laws made against them. Pope Innocent IV, 1252.
Upon completion of the Sermo Generalis judgment, secular authorities escort the condemned to a location outside the city gates. Here, they tie them to tall wooden stakes set amidst tons of kindling wood. Inquisitors themselves never attend these executions.
You were allowed to make your last confession to a confessor if you wished to, but because you were now in the custody of the secular arm, as it were, you couldn't do anything to save yourself from them because they had an absolute charge to execute you.
Burning at the stake is one of the most horrific death sentences imaginable. It might take hours for the condemned to be completely consumed by the flames. If the victim is lucky or his loved ones influential enough, there is enough fresh, wet wood in the pile to generate plenty of smoke. Death by asphyxiation is preferable to the slow agony of roasting alive. Even death can't protect you from the clutches of the Inquisition. Sometimes people who have passed away years before are posthumously accused and condemned as heretics. Their graves are pillaged and their remains added to the bonfires. Tragically for the surviving family, the worst is yet to come. Secular authorities immediately confiscate the property of the dead heretics, leaving spouses and children destitute, regardless of their own religious faithfulness. The morning after an execution often brings with it relic collectors, scavengers bearing sacks who comb the ashes for pieces of the corpses. In most cases, they are neither ghouls nor madmen. Usually, they are among the few who believe those executed to be true martyrs, deserving of veneration.
Many people went away thinking, well, the heretics are good Christians and inquisitors are evil people, so they could backfire.
By the 14th century, the Inquisition's campaign against heresy has reached its peak. At the height of its powers, the Church deals just as harshly with perceived treason from within its own ranks. When an offshoot of the Franciscan order breaks away, calling themselves spiritual Franciscans, and charging their order with abandoning the ideals of their founder, St. Francis of Assisi, Pope John XXII orders the Inquisition to crack down on them. With fewer heretics to prosecute, it seems as if the Inquisition might die out altogether. The business of hunting down and punishing witches brings the process back to life with a vengeance by the 14th century. Published in 1486, Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, lays out theological support, legal advice, and various techniques for accusing, torturing, and sentencing witches. It lives in infamy as the document that creates the archetypical image of the female witch and as one of the most overtly woman-hating works in all of world literature.
When a woman thinks alone, she thinks only evil. Since they are feebler in mind and body, it is not surprising they should come more under the spell of witchcraft. All witchcraft comes from a kind of lust, which in women is insatiable. Malleus Maleficarum.
History has proven that one of Malleus Maleficarum's authors, an inquisitor named Heinrich Kramer, had some problems controlling his own insatiable carnal lusts.
In 1485, he was charged with conducting an inquisition in the city of, or region of Innsbruck in what is now Austria. He got himself into a lot of trouble because most of the people he interrogated were women, and what he interrogated them about was mostly their sexual activity.